What's going on, everybody? It's Andrew here for Bowery Mick History. It's Thursday night, which means we're just sitting here chatting about history and such. As South Battery Pfeiffer, who I've been texting with back and forth for the last while, just mentioned there is a slight new little history emergency. But before we get to that, one thing I do want to mention: new episode of the Bowery Mick History podcast came out last Sunday. Yes, Sunday. Um, it's about the American Airborne during the Battle of the Bulge. If you missed it, just gonna drop that link right there. And the history now onto the history emergency that South Battery Pfeiffer mentioning. Apparently, this is something that neither myself nor he knew prior to just now, really. Because we're both big fans of the 119th New York Volunteer Infantry, New York Regiment that fought in the American Civil War, fought at Chancellorsville, Gettysburg, and did a whole thing that got sent west, did the whole March to the Sea with Sherman's army. Great stuff. Turns out, we just found out, the regiment lost its regimental colors at the Battle of Gettysburg on the very first day of the Battle of Gettysburg. And evidently no one bothered to mention it, which I feel like is a kind of a big deal, because 19th century warfare, losing your flag was kind of a big deal. But yeah, so South Battery Pfeiffer is working on researching that little thing and potentially why it was left out. I can already guess it was probably because I would wager it was because someone felt a little ashamed. Because it was the 19th century, and that was a big deal. But yeah, so that's interesting. But that's actually not the thing I was planning on talking about tonight, oddly enough. I was going back and forth as to what I want to talk about on this stream, and then I realized October marks the 25th anniversary of one of my very favorite video game series of all time. If you followed Bowery Mick History long enough, you'll probably know I love video games. I love a lot of nerd stuff. Video games most of all. And one of my favorite video game series of all time is Fallout. Fallout series, great series of sci-fi RPGs. And the Fallout series turned 25 earlier this month. And so I decided I'm going to do a whole stream about the history of Fallout and the history that influenced Fallout and the historical context under which the Fallout series came about, because it is a very interesting little story. And then on Saturday, when I do the gaming stream, I'm actually going to be streaming Fallout 4 and talking a little bit more about the history that influenced a game like Fallout 4 and the world that is portrayed in the game. So that's be sure to check that out. So yeah, let's get into it. So for those who don't know, the original Fallout came out in 1997, about 25 years ago, and it was described as a post-nuclear adventure RPG. The basic premise is Earth has basically human society has collapsed after nuclear war, and this is the aftermath. And this is, at the time when it came out, was sort of the latest in a line of entertainment media that was exploring this sort of possibility, this sort of post-apocalyptic world. But what's interesting is it's being influenced specifically by the events of that era, namely the aftermath of this. So this is a model of the first atomic bomb that was ever used on people. It's a replica of the little boy that was dropped on, I believe it was Hiroshima. I think that was the first one. I always get them confused. But the dropping of the atomic bomb and the beginning of the nuclear arms race and the beginning of the Cold War caused a sort of shift in the way a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction was treated. Prior to the Cold War, when you saw, you know, movies or films or TV, why did I say movies and films? Anyway, when you saw, you know, movies or TV, I guess TV wasn't really a thing at that point, but books, literature was a big one that depicted the, you know, collapse of human civilization. A lot of times it was done by an external force. One of the best examples of this would be War of the Worlds, where, you know, Earth is threatened with annihilation from an extraterrestrial force. But after the dropping of the atomic bombs and the world finally learned what humanity is, when humans finally realized what they were capable of in terms of destruction, that kind of caused a shift in how apocalyptic fiction was treated, essentially. Because no longer was it an external force that was causing the downfall of human society. Now it was humans. And as time went on, as the Cold War specifically progressed, we saw these themes kind of insert themselves into all manner of entertainment media. Music was a big one. If you were to compile if you're going to compile a list of Cold War era songs that talked about the nuclear apocalypse, it would be a very long list that spans several decades of music. Film obviously took this and ran with it. TV, which, you know, exploded as a medium following the Second World War, also did this. One of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes, I forget what it was called, but it's the one where the guy loves reading so much, tries to get away from people so they could just read. Then nuclear apocalypse happens, and he was hiding in a bank vault to hide away from people, and ends up being the last man on Earth. And then the twist is that he breaks his glasses, and now he can't read anymore. But that was an example of, you know, the Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation sort of beginning to, you know, seep into popular culture and entertainment media specifically. So it wasn't that much of a stretch that, you know, once video games became, you know, a mainstay of entertainment media, that these themes would make their way into video games. And there were a lot of video games early on that used this possibility of nuclear destruction to, you know, as like a setting, you know, this post-nuclear apocalypse as a setting. But the one that we're gonna pay attention to for now is Wasteland. It was published by Electronic Arts and was developed by a company called Interplay. Interplay decided we're gonna explore this idea of a post-nuclear American wasteland. So the game was an RPG, similar to what Fallout will become, and you basically control a party of desert rangers traveling through the remnants of what was the United States in this post-apocalyptic world. It was an alright game. It garnered enough of a following that it was successful enough for EA. But Interplay did not return to develop any of the sequels after the first Wasteland, because the company Interplay wanted to sort of break out on their own and turn into not only a development studio but also a game publisher. So they broke away from EA, and the first game that they really wanted to make as a publisher was actually a follow-up to Wasteland. They wanted to continue the Wasteland series, but unfortunately for Interplay, Electronic Arts retained the rights to the series. So while EA took the Wasteland series in its own direction, which isn't that great and not that memorable, Interplay had to basically create a new IP, but they still wanted to explore this post nuclear apocalypse world. And in October of 1997, the first Fallout came out. It was completely new RPG system. It was originally actually supposed to use a really interesting system as like its base of how the role-playing game was supposed to work, called GURPS, which was developed by this tiny little company in Austin, Texas, called Steve Jackson Games. But a bunch of licensing deals and whatnot ended up falling through. So the developers of the original Fallout, many of whom actually worked on Wasteland, which came out in 1988, if I remember correctly. So we're almost like 10 years since Wasteland. That's when Fallout comes out. They developed this brand new system called Special. It's named after one of the character attribute system that's in the game, and they create this brand new game that's set in the post-apocalyptic remnants of the American West Coast. And the basic premise was you, the player character, lived in a vault, one of many vaults designed to house a select group of the human population in the event of a nuclear catastrophe. Unfortunately, though, your vault, something went wrong with its water purification technology, and so your character was chosen to exit the vault into the wastelands and find a replacement water purification chip to save your vault. And in the process, you explore a lot of these like settlements strewn throughout the post-nuclear California ruins that show that humanity has managed to scrape together something in the wake of nuclear disaster. Fallout was a huge success. It was critically acclaimed, and so Interplay, in less than a year, set up a brand new game studio that was a part of the larger company of Interplay. That studio was called Black Isle, and Black Isle's first task was creating a sequel to Fallout. And they didn't really mess with the original engine all that much. They just decided to go and create a new story, and that was pretty much it. Fallout 2 came out a year later, in 1998, the year I was born, and was not as much of a success, but it still did well enough that Interplay was able to continue publishing games in the Fallout series. A lot of spin-offs. Going into the 2000s, though, Interplay ran into a number of sort of, what's it called? Oh yeah, financial issues. A lot of debt, a lot of debt that was taken on to keep the company alive. When the debt collectors came, the money wasn't there, and they got bought out a couple times. And eventually, by the mid 2000s, mid to late 2000s, in a desperate attempt to stay afloat, Interplay sold the rights to the game that really put them on the map, Fallout. They sold the rights to make single-player Fallout games to a little-known company at the time called Bethesda. Bethesda had put themselves on the map with a series of fantasy RPGs called the Elder Scrolls series. And when Bethesda acquired the rights to Fallout, they set to work making probably one of the best-known games in the entire series, Fallout 3, which came out in 2008, and still is, to this day, my favorite Fallout game. But Bethesda kept going. Interplay eventually went out of business entirely, and Bethesda got all of the rights to Fallout, because Interplay managed to maintain the rights to, oddly enough, the MMO. They retained the rights to multiplayer Fallout in case they ever wanted to make a, sort of like a World of Warcraft set in the Fallout universe kind of game. But eventually Bethesda got those rights, and that's why we have Fallout 76. But, throughout the entire Fallout series, the theme that remains constant the whole time is, this post-nuclear world and what can happen if bombs actually did drop, which I feel like is something that a lot of people have been thinking about in recent weeks, given the state of global affairs. And it is, an interesting thing to think about. But Fallout remains one of the long-standing examples of how the Cold War has impacted popular culture. And is certainly one of my favorite examples of that. Did I have? Oh, yeah. So, yeah, that's Fallout. The world of Fallout is a very interesting place, and you can see a lot of the interesting, historical contexts under which it was created. Even though it does technically come out after the Cold War has ended, its predecessor and arguably its prequel, I would argue, Wasteland, was created in the midst of the Cold War. Granted, the tail end of the Cold War, but still in the middle of the Cold War. And, the fears of what could happen if the United States and the USSR went to war with each other with nuclear weapons is what really influenced how that game was developed, and as a result influenced how Fallout came about. And it is also very interesting to keep in mind, to think about that, this idea of, the next big international conflict is the thing that will destroy the world. It's a very prevalent idea. I remember watching the behind the scenes to Saving Private Ryan once, and they were doing an interview with Steven Spielberg, and Spielberg said, World War III is going to be the end of the world. And so that idea is very much like ingrained into how, at least, the entertainment industry approaches this subject. Because Fallout literally has you running through the remnants of World War III. They call it the Great War in the game's lore, but it's World War III, only it's not with Russia. I think it's with communist China. Probably didn't want to piss off the USSR at that point. Actually, no, it wasn't the USSR at that point. It was the newly founded Russian Federation, which was doing great. But yeah, that's Fallout. So completely unrelated to this thing is our neat little history thing, random history thing of the week. I'm gonna get a more solid name for that. And that is this. So this is the 1939 Michelin Guide. It's a guidebook. This one was specifically for France, made in 1939, just before the Nazis invaded. So there was no 1940 through 45 edition. Actually, there might have been a 45 edition. I never bothered to look. But you'll notice at the very bottom of this 1939 guide of France, it says reproduced by the United States by the Military Intelligence Division, United States War Department. So this was an interesting thing that I stumbled upon while doom scrolling on the internet the other night. Turns out, 1939. Actually, yeah, no, 1944. Sorry. In June of 1944, the United States and its allies were getting ready for the invasion of Normandy, and were concerned that the Nazis had 4 years in France to basically rename every single road if they wanted to, which they did. And so they weren't sure if any of their maps were actually going to be right or useful. So they reproduced the Michelin Guide from 1939 and cross-referenced it with every map that they have, every aerial reconnaissance photo, everything that they had from that period, from their preparations for the invasion of Normandy. Oddly enough, the Nazis had overdone it on the counterintelligence in changing all these road names and whatnot, that they also had to refer to older copies of the Michelin Guide from 1939, only they didn't have the ability to mass reproduce them. So they were at a slight disadvantage in that regard. But this is an interesting little tidbit of history of seeing, something as very simple as a travel guide produced by a tire company being such a pivotal part of one of the most important military operations in human history. It's kind of interesting. So yeah, that's all I got for tonight. Thank you all for watching. Thank you to South Barry Pfeiffer for bringing this history emergency about the 119th New York. We will definitely get on that, and maybe come back to you next week with more developments. Who knows? Maybe I can get South Barry Pfeiffer on the stream to talk about it. We'll see. Anyway, but yeah, thank you all for watching. The video of this is going to be up on Twitch for a little bit. I think they're usually up for a week, but it's also going to be put up on YouTube and the Bowery Mick History Facebook page. And be sure to tune in Saturday because we're going to be streaming some Fallout 4. And also, keep meaning to bring this up. Monday, October 31st, Halloween, there's going to be a special live stream here on the Bowery Mick History Twitch channel with my partner Alex. We're going to be playing the remake of the original Resident Evil. And we're going to be talking about horror and the evolution of horror in entertainment media, and specifically in video games, but also in media in general. And also just like the history of the Resident Evil series, because it is a major entertainment franchise at this point. It's not really going anywhere. And yeah, so if you have nothing better to do on Halloween, and maybe if you do have something better to do, still show up, say hi. It's always nice. But yeah, definitely check that out. Let me see, because there is an event page for it on the Bowery Mick History Facebook page, and I'm gonna grab the link to that real quick. If I haven't, where is it? Here we are. I should have grabbed this link beforehand, but oh well. This is very entertaining to watch, I'm sure. Anyway, there's that link. So definitely check that out. Also, I'm 99% sure below where you see this is a single link to the Bowery Mick History link tree, where you can get every single link. So if you're ever wondering, what's the Twitch, or what's the, I guess not the Twitch, what's the Twitter, where's the Facebook, where's the Instagram, where's all that stuff, it's all there. Definitely check it out. But yeah, so thank you all for watching. Be sure to tune in Saturday at 8, where we will be playing some Fallout, talking more about the Cold War, about the interesting world of Fallout, and also I downloaded some mods for it, because those always make the game better, and so we'll be talking about other things, I'm sure. But yeah, thank you all, and see you Saturday, hopefully, maybe. Okay, bye.